When remembering Joyadi, two facets of the experience stand out. One intimately personal to each one of us. Another, the inspiration that stands from her example, that applies to all in the same way. Recalling each one of us in our personal relationship, we would have numerous stories, sweet, joyous, happy, inspiring, giving us strength, confidence, helping us grow and face life. My own story is perhaps the shortest of all, as I came to meet her physically very late. And it was at a time when I was working in the ashram's archives, and the head of the ashram's archives, Jayantilalda, he came to me and said, Joyadi wants to invite you to Calcutta. So my first response, as I was not very fond of traveling, I said, who is Joyadi? Why Calcutta? No, I don't want to go. So he said, you please tell her yourself. So I went all prepared to say no, and as I entered the room, she turned around, beaming, spreading that joy, festivity, the fullness that was typical of her presence, and said, we want you to come to Calcutta. Will you come? And even as my mind said no, I heard myself speaking, yes, Joyadi. And I don't know why, at that moment my heart simply melted, and I just felt myself like a child to her. Subsequently, in all the visits, when she came to receive me at the airport, I would introduce her to my friends as, this is my mother in Calcutta. And I think all of us felt the same way. To each one, when she met, there was this complete self-giving and pouring of herself, full of sweetness, full of energy and dynamism, enthusiasm, optimism. And it was natural, therefore, all of us felt uplifted when we spoke to her, when we met her. And we came to her for that. In a sense, almost we depended on her for that extra lift. Because in her presence, whatever was the lack, it felt completed. And naturally, we related to her as children to a mother. The sweet stories all of us would have to share are innumerable. The other side, which is the example that she has set, is something which I would like to dwell upon in some detail. Because it is that example which today we must rest upon. If we rest upon only the first side of the contact, we will feel a nostalgia, perhaps even a sense of sadness at what we have lost. But it is this other side which will continue to give us the same strength and inspiration that we felt in that intimate personal relationship, and which will extend that relationship not just of the 8 years that have passed, but for the rest of our lives and forever. And we can ask ourselves, how did Joyadi become Joyadi? I am looking back at the big scene, the big perspective of time, of the story of this institution, Lakshmi's house, It was established formally as a Sri Aurobindo center, offered and dedicated to the Divine Mother and blessed by her 41 years ago, in February, the same month. And soon after, as things gradually developed, a point came when there was nobody to look after and develop it further. And after trying many people, Pradyodha, when he almost gave up, Joya quietly asked, I can help a little. And that's how she began. And when she came into this work, there was no background of an experience of institution building. There was not perhaps in the unusual personality the extraordinary capability required to take it to where it has been brought. But it was by a constant, conscious consecration to the divine that she grew and the work was done through her. In many ways, we see in her what can be described as an ideal, conscious, aspiring human instrument for the direct action of the Divine Shakti. And the action of the Divine Shakti is not only upon the world but on developing the instrument itself. And her journey of her own personal evolution is the journey that takes place when we take up the conscious yoga. We can understand this process in various ways, but perhaps the way which is most approachable to us in her context is to view our conscious evolution as the flowing out of the powers of our innate divinity, of the divine soul within us. And the divine Shakti, the divine power and force flow out from within, descend from above and fill us. And that divine Shakti has 4 great aspects. We know them as Maheshwari, Mahakali, Mahalakshmi and Mahasaraswati, which, flowing through us, evoke within us 4 kinds of response, 4 kinds of aspiration, 4 directions of development and evolution, 4 kinds of Svabhava. That side which aspires towards knowledge responds to Maheshwari. That side which responds to the effectuation of that knowledge with strength and force and dynamism aspires and responds to Mahakali. That side of us which flows out in a plenitude, a richness of fulfillment and exchange and growth through exchange, responds to Mahalakshmi. And that side of us which flows out in a loving service, in a precise perfection in detail, rises in response to Mahasaraswati. And in a sense, human evolution is nothing but the outpouring of these 4 powers of the Divine Mother and perhaps more to follow, and their establishment in our whole being, and the transmutation of our whole being by the action of the Divine Shakti, until we become less and less this petty, small individual ego, more and more the entire ocean of completeness that the Divine Shakti represents. And the means for that, the effort necessary from us individually, Sri Aurobindo describes as a triple effort of aspiration, rejection, and surrender. A conscious aspiration towards fulfilling that highest possibility, towards fulfilling that potential that lies in us as a seed, towards fulfilling the purpose for which we have taken birth. A conscious aspiration, constantly renewed and intensified. Rejection of all that stands in the way or is contrary to that central aspiration. And by a conscious rearrangement of our life and every detail of our life, our personality and every movement of our nature around that central aspiration, gradually the whole being is drawn together and united around that central fire. And finally, surrender. A conscious self-giving of this now conscious one being to the Divine Himself, to the Divine pouring down as the Divine Shakti, filling us in response to our aspiration, flowing into our whole being to the tiniest detail of our nature, and from within releasing that possibility which is bound in the ignorance and inconscience of our nature, transmuting from within, plastifying, making more conscious, uniting, integrating, reshaping, recasting our whole being until what emerges is no more the hard, dense, dark iron, but the free, conscious, glowing, golden being of divinity that each one of us is destined to become. In the normal process of things, that destiny will be achieved, perhaps in another few thousands of lives. By this conscious process of aspiration and conscious self-surrender to the Divine Shakti, we will achieve it not just in one life, but as you can see in Joyadi's case, within a decade or two even. And her life stands as an epitome, an example, an inspiration of precisely this process and the fulfillment that it can lead to. As she gave herself to help a little, she gave selflessly, with a conscious aspiration to serve the Divine Shakti, uniting her whole being around that central aspiration, consciously surrendering herself to the Divine Mother. And the result, gradually, bit by bit, and then more and more rapidly, the powers of the Divine Shakti were revealed more and more completely. And we see in Joyadi an extraordinary integration of these four facets of the human potential and of the Divine Shakti. There was in her this wide base of knowledge, the aspect of Maheshwari, that she had something interesting to say practically in any field. Many even approached her for help with ailments and advice for medicines, among so many other things. Not very well known, but she knew a little bit of everything and a wide base. And the dynamism of Mahakali fulfilling that purpose, fulfilling the aspiration, fulfilling what the Divine Shakti wills, a dynamism that could continue for several days at a time without needing to rest. If rest came for a while, it was good. If it didn't come, well, she just went on working. And we see an interesting aspect of how she went on, even when sometimes she would not eat food, but just keep on munching on little chilies. And even today we keep those chilies in the dining room, and it's part of my tradition to take a small bite each time I come here. But that tremendous dynamism that was infectious, which sustained and built the whole this whole institution. And it was one of the difficulties which we experienced later after she left her physical body, that we missed that support of dynamism, and we had to find that strength and energy and force within us and make that extra effort which she made for us otherwise. So meeting her was always like meeting a huge outpour of an oceanic energy. Mahalakshmi, her life was a festival, as Ranjan just told us, and in everything she touched, there was always this beauty and enjoyment and delight and a fullness. It attracted people. It is one of the aspects of Mahalakshmi's influence, that it draws all kinds of possibilities and makes possible what otherwise would seem impossible. And she drew so many. Maha Saraswati, aspect of perfection in minute detail, and we see that in everything she did. And while she was demanding in her own way, when we couldn't come up to the standard that she set, often she would work alone through the night to complete what we have left incomplete. She couldn't sleep unless it is brought to that level of perfection. And you come next morning and you find what you had left behind as incomplete, now something so wonderful. And disarmingly she would say, "You have done a beautiful job." This integration of all four aspects is very rare in human beings and often represents the work of many lives. And what you find in Joyadi's life is this achievement or this realization so rapidly done, as if so many lives worth of growth was compressed in a few years. It is this that we have to lean upon for inspiration. We too can follow that example and must follow that example. Having done her work, for whatever reason, she left from our perspective prematurely. But from her perspective, perhaps, what she came for was completed. And had she continued further, we might not have made the necessary effort to go that much more, because she was doing it for us. And it is that which was the most painful part of the transition when she left her physical body. Suddenly the support was gone. And it took 2 or 3 years before we were able to gather ourselves. And by we, I mean each one of us individually and all of us collectively. Those working here, those working elsewhere, all of us who leaned on her. It took a few years for us to gather ourselves and then begin to make that little bit of effort. And what we have done, looking back in these last 8 years, I think she would be very proud to see. And she must be watching with great pride and satisfaction. But what more needs to be done ahead is what stands before us as a challenge. Can we come up to the standards that she has set by the example of her life? And her example is meant precisely to show us that we can. Will we come up? Will we make the necessary effort? And the means also she has shown us. What is the journey ahead? There are two sides to that also. There is the personal side and then there is the collective side. In the personal side, for each one of us to be able to consciously dedicate ourselves to the fulfillment of our highest, inmost aspiration, to give ourselves in a conscious self-surrender to the Divine Mother, to the Divine Shakti, aspiring to become conscious instruments, as she showed us. And then let her lead us according to our own Svabhava and Swadharma. So that's the first side within each one of us individually, by a conscious aspiration, rejection and surrender, to consecrate our lives deliberately and more intensely. On the other side, on a collective level, when she began the small nursery, Dyuman Bhai wrote to her, I believe. He said, "I believe you have started a college." And she was a little surprised, but Dyuman Bhai himself was a man of far-seeing vision, and he saw in this small beginning a far greater fulfillment. And all that we have realized so far is the beginning of so much more that must continue. And only yesterday, looking at this perspective, I observed that this school must grow to become a college and a university, and must have interwoven into this whole process a comprehensive teacher training program. I can make a comment which is somewhat frankly stated. I think existing B.Ed programs in the country are worthless. They don't lead to anything worthwhile in terms of the growth in the teacher or in the content and approach of education. Here in the school, we have tried to create what can stand as an inspiration, a model for others to learn from, replicate, modify as needed, where the whole educational system has been recast along the lines that Sri Aurobindo saw necessary for the national reawakening, for the truth of India's soul to be manifested in her children. And in the process, we have created our own framework for training and supporting the whole growth, not only of the students but also of teachers. And it's a start again which demands a greater fulfillment. It cannot be done everywhere easily. It needs an environment where people of a common aspiration, with a basic turn of a selfless self-giving to a higher cause, are gathered together and work together on a new basis of a new consciousness. What started here as a seed 41 years ago has grown to be a stable and a larger manifestation of that possibility, and we must take it to the next few steps that this movement, this development demands, which Joya would have certainly done. In Joya, as these four aspects of the divine Shakti poured within and established themselves in her, we felt from her the vibration of a divine presence and the completeness of its manifestation. It was not surprising, therefore, that for many who came here, they came not because they knew Sri Aurobindo or the Mother, but because they felt that vibration from Joyadi. And she became, in a sense, for them, even the living presence of the Divine Mother. And in a sense, she was the extension of the Divine Mother's finger, reaching down to us, touching us physically and saying, "Here I am," holding us by the hand, leading us in our early tottering steps until we could learn to walk, and then withdrawing gently and saying, "Now you must walk on your own." These last 8 years, we have been learning to keep our balance. Now we must walk faster and perhaps begin to run. And it is she, the Divine Mother, who will fill us, new shape us as she shaped Joyadi, lead us forward and carry us through to something which is not possible by our human effort. It will be that divine force which will realize it, but we must give ourselves as conscious instruments for the fulfillment of the divine manifestation.